Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We love to really dig into these fascinating topics that will kind of make you think differently about the world. And today we're going to be looking at the connection between societal shifts and the power of our own beliefs.
Really powerful stuff.
Yeah. And to guide us on this journey, we're diving deep into a lecture transcript by cell biologist Bruce Lipton.
Oh, yeah, I know Bruce Lipton. Love his work.
The Biology of Belief, it's called.
Hmm.
And right off the bat, one of the things that really struck me was how he connects what a lot of us are feeling right now, this kind of global upheaval,
Oh, yeah.
to a larger pattern of civilizational cycles.
Exactly. And this is one of the first things that really stood out to me as well, because he's basically saying that civilizations, they kind of have a life cycle.
Oh, like people do.
Just like people do. They go through these distinct phases of development, maturity, decline, and ultimately they collapse.
Wow.
And so when you look at it that way, Lipton suggests that a lot of the crises that we're seeing today, like, everything, climate change, the political instability,
Wars,
the wars, all of it.
the pandemics.
Yeah, they could actually be viewed as symptoms of a civilization that is,
In decline.
in decline.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's a pretty sobering thought when you really think about it. But it does resonate with what a lot of people are feeling right now. This
unease.
this feeling that, like, things are just not quite right.
It's falling apart.
Yeah, things are unraveling.
Yeah.
And, he really breaks it down. He says that when a civilization's core beliefs and the structures that it's built upon become too rigid,
Too stuck in their ways.
too stuck, they lose the ability to adapt. They can't adapt to the changing world. And he even gives this great analogy. He's like, think about it this way. If you're trying to solve today's problems,
Uh-huh.
using yesterday's thinking, you're likely going to hit a wall.
Like trying to shove a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. You're going to get stuck.
Doesn't work.
And so it's really about recognizing that there's a need for a shift in our thinking.
So if we are in this decline, are we just supposed to surrender to it? Like, is that...
What's interesting is that even though it's a pretty heavy topic, Lipton actually has a surprisingly optimistic perspective.
Okay.
He sees this period of upheaval not just as a breakdown, but as a necessary step in a larger evolutionary leap for humanity.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and get this. He proposes that those who are feeling the most disconnected from the current systems, the ones who are like really questioning the old ways of doing things, they might actually be the ones who are in the best position to lead this change.
So instead of being, feeling lost and afraid, we're at the forefront
At the forefront.
of something new and exciting.
Exactly. It's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so where do our beliefs fit into all of this?
Well, that's a great question, and that's really the core of Lipton's work.
Okay.
He argues that every civilization throughout history has grappled with three fundamental questions.
What are they?
First, how do we get here?
Okay.
Second, why are we here?
Mhm.
And third, how do we make the best of it?
Okay, those are some pretty big questions.
They are big questions, but he argues that the answers that a civilization finds to these questions shape its entire worldview, its
Yeah.
culture, its values, basically everything.
So it's like a foundation.
It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Wow.
And he actually uses a really cool visual to illustrate this. He has this color gradient chart
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
showing how different civilizations throughout history have balanced their beliefs between the spiritual and the material realms.
So kind of where they fall on the spectrum of,
Yeah.
how much emphasis is put on the spiritual versus how much emphasis is put on the material world.
Exactly. And so he suggests that, the way a civilization answers those fundamental questions really determines where it falls on that spectrum.
So, for example, he talks about early animistic cultures.
Oh, yeah. Like some Native American tribes, for example.
Yeah, and they saw the world in a very different way than we do.
Totally different. For them, the spiritual and the material realms were completely interconnected. There was a sense of spirit that was present in all things, in the trees, in the rocks, in the animals, in the rivers.
Everything.
Everything was infused with spirit, and their focus was on living in harmony with the natural world.
So for them, the answer to those big questions about how did we get here and why are we here and all of that, it was found both within themselves and within nature.
Exactly. There was this sense of oneness, of interconnectedness that really permeated their entire worldview.
But as civilizations evolved, that balance shifted a bit, didn't it?
It did. With polytheism, for example, we start to see a separation of spirit from matter.
Okay.
The gods become more externalized, more separate from the physical world.
So no longer the spirit within everything, but these separate beings.
Right, and that trend continued with monotheism. Suddenly there's this one God,
Right.
often seen as this transcendent being,
Separate.
separate from the physical world.
Yeah.
And if you think about the role of the church during that period,
Yeah.
the focus was very much on preparing for the afterlife.
Right.
Seeing this earthly realm as kind of a testing ground for a greater spiritual reward.
Yeah. A means to an end.
Exactly. So the emphasis was very much on the spiritual at the expense of the material.
Okay. And then came theism,
Yeah.
which Lipton describes as kind of a return to a more balanced view.
Right. He talks about how it was inspired in part by some of those Native American philosophies. And he sees this reflected in the founding principles of the United States.
Interesting.
But then things take another really dramatic turn.
Okay, what happens?
We enter the era of scientific materialism. And this is where the pendulum swings really heavily towards the material realm.
Okay.
The focus becomes almost exclusively on what can be measured, observed, and scientifically proven.
Okay.
Anything outside of that is often dismissed or ridiculed.
We become very focused on the physical, the tangible, the quantifiable.
Exactly. It's all about data and evidence and,
What you can see.
what you can see, what you can touch, what you can measure.
So we went from seeing spirit in everything to believing that only the material world matters.
And that is the problem Lipton argues.
Oh, how so?
He says that this overemphasis on the material has led us to disconnect from nature, to exploit our resources, and to prioritize competition and individual success over cooperation and community well-being.
It's become kind of a dog-eat-dog world.
Exactly. It's the survival of the fittest mentality that he believes is ultimately self-destructive.
He even challenges Darwin's theory of evolution, doesn't he? Specifically, the concept of survival of the fittest.
He does. He says that it's based on this flawed science and that it's contributed to this cutthroat worldview.
So he says that Darwin made this incorrect assumption that animals always reproduce faster than plants.
Right. And that's just not true.
Not true, but the idea kind of took hold, and it ended up fueling this whole idea that competition is the driving force of evolution.
And Lipton challenges that. He suggests that cooperation and interdependence are just as important for survival, if not more so.
So it's not all about this, every man for himself mentality.
Not at all. In fact, he points to the field of epigenetics, which means control above the genes.
Wait a minute. I always thought our genes determined everything about us, our health, our personality, our predispositions, everything.
That was the prevailing belief for decades. It was based on this concept called the central dogma. This idea that information flows in one direction from DNA to RNA to protein.
Okay.
Essentially, your genes control your biology, and you're pretty much stuck with what you've inherited.
So Lipton is saying that's not the whole story.
He uses a great analogy to explain it. He says that DNA is like a blueprint.
Okay.
It holds the instructions, but it doesn't actually do the building. It's the environment. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our experiences, all of these things play a huge role in shaping how those genes are actually expressed.
So we're not just passive bystanders at the mercy of our genetic code.
Not at all.
Wow. Okay.
And his own research with stem cells is a really powerful demonstration of this.
Okay. So
He found that genetically identical stem cells could become completely different types of cells, muscle cells, bone cells, fat cells, simply by changing the environment they were in.
wow. It's pretty amazing. So it's not just about the blueprint, but about where the blueprint is.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of his most well-known analogies. He calls the human body a skin-covered Petri dish.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What does he mean by that?
Imagine your body as a Petri dish and your blood is the culture medium.
Yeah.
Within that environment, you have trillions of cells all working together.
Right. 50 trillion, I think he said.
50 trillion. Yeah, and your brain acts like the government sending messages, both chemical and energetic, to those 50 trillion citizens.
50 trillion citizens. Wow, that's incredible.
It's mind-boggling when you really think about it.
So our thoughts and beliefs actually impact the environment that all those little cells are living in.
That's exactly what Lipton's research suggests. If you're constantly stressed, worried, or fearful, that creates a very different internal environment than if you're feeling, joyful, peaceful, and loved.
Yeah, makes sense.
And those feelings, those energetic states, they actually influence how your cells behave.
It's almost like we're broadcasting like a news report to all those trillions of citizens inside us. And the quality of that news is going to impact their entire world.
I love that analogy. It's so true. And just like in any society, stress can lead to all sorts of problems.
So what kinds of problems does Lipton see stress creating at a cellular level?
Well, he outlines three key damaging effects of stress. The first one is that it shuts down growth.
Okay.
When you're in survival mode, all your energy is focused on just getting by, not on thriving or expanding.
Makes
It's
sense.
like a plant that goes dormant during a drought. It's just trying to stay alive, not grow new leaves or flowers.
Right, it's in conservation mode.
Exactly. The second effect is that stress suppresses the immune system.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Lipton explains it like this. He says you have two defense systems. One protects you from external threats, and the other protects your internal environment. But stress diverts resources to that external defense system, even if the threat isn't real or immediate.
So it's like we're constantly preparing for battle, even when there's no enemy in sight.
Exactly. And that leaves our internal defense system, our immune system, weakened and vulnerable.
Makes so much sense. We all know how much easier it is to get sick when we're stressed out.
Hmm.
It's like we're disarming our own internal protection agency.
Exactly. And the third effect of stress that Lipton highlights is reduced intelligence.
Okay.
So when we're under stress, blood flow is diverted away from the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's responsible for, conscious reasoning and planning.
So all those executive functions, problem solving, decision making, critical thinking, they go offline when we're stressed.
Essentially, yes, we become more reactive, more impulsive, less capable of thinking clearly, and we rely on instinct and habit instead of thoughtful consideration.
Okay, is that good?
Not good. And this brings us to a really crucial point in Lipton's work, the power of the subconscious mind.
I've heard this idea before that our subconscious mind is running the show most of the time. Is that what Lipton's getting at here?
He estimates that the subconscious mind accounts for about 95% of our mental activity, while our conscious mind is only about 5%.
Wow, 95%.
So even if we have positive intentions and we're consciously trying to make changes, those deeply ingrained subconscious programs can often override our best efforts.
It's like our conscious mind is this tiny little dinghy trying to steer a massive ocean liner.
It's a great analogy. No wonder it feels like an uphill battle sometimes, right?
It is.
And Lipton uses this really powerful analogy to describe this. He talks about the trained elephant.
Okay.
So imagine an elephant that's been trained from a young age to believe that it can't break free from a rope that's tied to its leg.
Okay.
Even when that elephant grows up to be this powerful, massive creature, it doesn't even try to escape because it's been conditioned to believe that it's impossible.
So we're all walking around with these invisible ropes from our past, these subconscious beliefs that are limiting our potential.
That's the idea, and he believes that the first 6 years of life are especially critical for programming these subconscious beliefs.
Why those years in particular?
Well, during that time, our brains are primarily in these delta and theta brainwave states, and theta in particular is associated with a hypnotic state.
Boy.
So young children are incredibly receptive to suggestions, and they absorb information from their environment without consciously filtering it.
So it's like they're in a constant state of hypnosis, downloading beliefs and behaviors from their parents, their caregivers, the world around them.
Exactly. And those beliefs, those programs, they can continue to run in the background, shaping our perceptions, our choices, our relationships, even our health, long after we've consciously forgotten where they came from.
Wow, so this has started to connect back to what we were talking about earlier with societal change. If we're all running these subconscious programs, how does that impact the evolution of a civilization?
Well, imagine a society where a large percentage of the population has been programmed with these beliefs of scarcity, limitation, or fear. Those beliefs are inevitably going to manifest in the systems and structures that they create. It becomes kind of a collective subconscious holding everyone back from reaching their full potential.
So even if we change the leaders or the institutions, if we don't address those underlying beliefs, we're just going to recreate the same patterns over and over again.
And that's precisely why Lipton sees this current period of upheaval as an opportunity, as these old systems break down. We have a chance to examine those limiting beliefs and start to rewrite them.
So it's not about finding someone to blame. It's about taking responsibility for our own internal programming.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get really empowering.
Okay, I like that.
It's not just about changing the outer world. It's about changing ourselves from the inside out.
But if we're not even aware of these subconscious programs running in the background, how do we even begin to change them?
Well, the first step is awareness. Lipton suggests paying attention to the patterns in your life, your relationships, your work, your finances, your health. Where do you feel stuck out? What self-sabotaging behaviors keep showing up? What fears or limiting beliefs are holding you back?
So it's like becoming a detective of your own mind.
Exactly. Once you start to see the patterns, you can start to ask yourself what beliefs might be driving these behaviors. And often you'll find that those beliefs were instilled in you at a very young age, and you've just been running them on autopilot ever since.
It's like those default settings on your phone. You just accept them without ever questioning if they're actually serving you.
That's a great analogy, and once you identify those default beliefs, you can start to challenge them. Are they really true? Do they align with who you want to be and how you want to live?
Okay, so let's say I've identified a limiting belief. What next? Do I just try to think positive thoughts and hope for the best?
Positive thinking can definitely be helpful, but it's often not enough to override those deep-seated subconscious programs. Remember that analogy of the tiny dinghy trying to steer the massive ocean liner? It's going to take more than just a little positive thinking to change course.
So what are some of the more powerful tools that Lipton suggests we use to really rewrite those programs?
Well, he and many other researchers in this field point to things like hypnotherapy, energy psychology, and certain mindfulness practices as really effective ways to access and reprogram the subconscious mind.
So we can actually use these tools to kind of bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to that 95% that's running the show behind the scenes.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so exciting. We're not just stuck with the programming we received in childhood. We can actually learn to communicate with our subconscious mind and rewire those old patterns.
So we're not victims of our genes. We can become masters of our own destiny. I love
It
that.
is empowering, but it's also a bit daunting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, if our thoughts are so powerful, how do we make sure we're using that power for good?
That's a great question, and it's one that Lipton addresses directly. He reminds us that we're not isolated individuals, we're interconnected beings, part of a larger web of life.
Right.
We're all cells in a larger organism, and our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole.
So it's not enough to just focus on our own personal growth. We have a responsibility to consider the impact of our thoughts and actions on the world around us.
Exactly. If one part of the body is suffering, the whole system is affected. And he argues that understanding this biology of belief gives us a really powerful tool for creating a more compassionate, just, and sustainable society.
So it sounds like he's suggesting that the solutions to some of the biggest challenges that we're facing, things like climate change and social injustice, they might actually lie within ourselves within our own beliefs and behaviors.
He believes that those outer challenges are really just reflections of our inner world, our collective state of consciousness.
So if you want to change the world, we need to start by changing ourselves.
That's the essence of his message, and it's incredibly empowering. It reminds us that we're not just passive observers in the unfolding of history. We're active participants shaping the future with every thought, every belief, every action.
So much of what Lipton's talking about, it really resonates with me, this idea that we're not just victims of our circumstances. We actually have a lot more power than we realize.
It's a really radical idea, and yet at the same time, it's so hopeful.
Yeah, because it means that change is possible, but it also feels like a huge responsibility if our thoughts and beliefs are so powerful.
Mm.
How do we make sure we're using that power wisely?
And that's where Lipton's work gets really practical. He encourages us to start by taking a look at our own subconscious programming.
Like those default settings we were talking about?
Exactly. Like, what beliefs are we running on autopilot? What stories about ourselves, about the world, have we been carrying around for years, maybe even decades? And then how are those beliefs showing up in our lives?
Are they creating, patterns in our relationships or holding us back in our careers or even, impacting our physical health?
All of that. And he really emphasizes that once we identify those limiting beliefs, we can start to consciously rewrite them.
So it's not like a life sentence. We're not stuck with whatever programming we received in childhood.
Not at all. Our bodies are incredibly adaptable. They're capable of healing and transformation. But that transformation often begins with shifting our perceptions, our beliefs, our thoughts.
So if our bodies, as Lipton points out, can house 50 trillion cells working together in harmony, imagine the potential we have to create a thriving global community.
It's really mind-blowing when you think about it, that level of cooperation happening inside of us all the time.
Yeah, and he leaves us with this powerful vision of a future where we understand the interconnectedness of all things, a world where cooperation, compassion, and sustainability are the guiding principles.
Such a beautiful vision.
It is. But it's going to take a lot of work to get there, both individually and collectively.
Lipton reminds us that we're capable of so much more than we often give ourselves credit for. We have the potential to heal ourselves, to transform our relationships, and to create a world that works for everyone. But it all starts with understanding the incredible power of our own minds.
I think this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It really has.
Thank you for joining us as we explore the fascinating world of Bruce Lipton and the biology of belief.
We hope you found some valuable insights and maybe even a little inspiration to take with you on your own journey.
And remember, the future's not predetermined. We have the power to shape it with every thought, every belief, every action.
So choose wisely and let's create a world that reflects our highest values and aspirations.
Thanks for listening.